A millionaire is stunned to spot a beggar on the street was his girlfriend, who vanished from his life 6 years ago. Beside her stand 2 twin children, their features hauntingly identical to his own. As he delves deeper into her disappearance, what shocking truths from the past are waiting to be uncovered? The limousine came to an abrupt halt, jolting Daniel Christopher from his thoughts. The screech of brakes echoed on the quiet street as the chauffeur stepped out, muttering apologies while heading to check the cause of the disruption. Daniel leaned back, adjusting his perfectly tailored suit, irritation flickering across his face. But his attention shifted abruptly. Across the street, amidst the hum of the city, a commotion unfolded outside a modest restaurant. A woman, disheveled and frail, was being ushered out by an impatient staff member. Her hands trembled as she held 2 young boys close, their wide eyes reflecting confusion and fear. The trio's appearance was stark, threadbare clothes, shoes scuffed to the sole, and an air of exhaustion that seemed to weigh heavily on their small frames. Daniel froze. The woman's silhouette was achingly familiar, though time had etched hardship into her features. His heart seized as recognition struck like a lightning bolt. It was Miley. Miley, the woman who had once been his whole world. Her face, though weathered, carried traces of the vibrant, who had shared his dreams and his heart. The 2 boys at her side, their resemblance to him was undeniable, from the shape of their brows to the intensity of their gaze. "Miley!" Daniel called out, stepping out of the car without a second thought. His voice cracked with urgency, disbelief laced with a plea. She turned sharply, her eyes meeting his. Fear flashed in them, instinctive fear. Clutching the children tighter, Miley spun on her heel and fled, her pace quickening with every step. Daniel hesitated, his limbs frozen in a moment of paralysis, before attempting to follow. But his feet faltered as he saw them disappear into the bustling street, the crowd swallowing their presence. He was left standing there, helpless, his chest heavy with unresolved questions. Back in the limousine, Daniel sank into the plush leather seat. The driver, sensing his boss's distraction, said nothing and returned to his post. Daniel leaned against the window. A maelstrom of emotions churned within him. Shock, confusion, and an old ache he had thought buried, but was now alive and clawing at his chest. Miley. Her name repeated itself in his mind like a haunting refrain. 6 years had passed since she disappeared from his life, vanishing without warning or explanation. Their last days together played back in his memory with brutal clarity. She had been his partner, not only in love, but in ambition. He remembered her sitting beside him at their worn kitchen table, papers spread out as they planned their dreams, expanding the textile factory, offering employment to those in need, creating something meaningful together. Their bond had been built on shared ideals and a love so deep it had felt unbreakable. Then she was gone, without a note, a word, or even a sign. He had searched, agonized, and finally resigned himself to the harsh reality that she was lost to him. In time, his career flourished. He built an empire, becoming the name that commanded both respect in the business world. Now he had a life that others envied, a life bound by power and wealth, but devoid of what mattered most. The upcoming marriage to Elizabeth Murphy, daughter of the esteemed Judge Murphy, was another piece of that calculated existence. It was a union orchestrated not by love, but by the intricate dance of alliances and power. Elizabeth was beautiful, poised, and determined, but there was no warmth between them. Their relationship was a transaction, not a connection, and yet Daniel had accepted this fate as penance for losing what truly mattered. The limousine glided through the city streets, but Daniel barely noticed the landmarks that passed by. The weight of Miley's flight, the fear in her eyes, and the reality of her situation clung to him like a shroud. What had brought her to this point? The vibrant, driven Miley he had known would never have let herself fall so far unless forced by circumstances beyond her control. The car rolled to a stop outside the city's most prestigious bridal boutique, its grand facade illuminated by soft, golden lights. Daniel Christopher sat motionless in the back seat, the tumult of his thoughts leaving him unprepared for what lay ahead. His hand rested on the door handle, but he hesitated. The driver cleared his throat discreetly, jolting Daniel back to reality. Pushing the door open, he stepped out into the cool evening air, straightening his tie as though it could shield him from the whirlwind of emotions inside. Elizabeth Murphy was already inside, no doubt awaiting him with the impatience of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. When Daniel entered, the boutique's opulence felt stifling. Mirrors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, reflecting Elizabeth's slender figure wrapped in an exquisite white gown. Her carefully styled hair and poised demeanor exuded elegance and power. She turned sharply at the sound of his footsteps, her brows knitting together in irritation. "You're late," she said curtly, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. Her expression hardened as she gestured toward the row of waiting attendants, their hands full of fabric samples and measurement charts. "Do you think this us can wait for your convenience?" Daniel met her gaze but said nothing. Words failed him, his mind still entrenched in the image of Miley's face, worn but achingly familiar. Elizabeth noticed his distracted state and stepped closer, lowering her voice to an icy whisper. "Don't waste my time." Before he could respond, she turned on her heel, dismissing the attendants with a wave. "I'll be at home. Think carefully about where your priorities lie," she said over her shoulder, her words laden with warning as she strode out. Daniel watched her leave, but he didn't follow. Instead, he sank into a nearby chair, ignoring the curious glances of the boutique staff. Elizabeth's ultimatum faded into irrelevance. His heart and mind were elsewhere. Across the city, in a cramped one-room apartment in a forgotten corner of town, Miley sat on a threadbare sofa, staring out of a cracked window. The night crept in, casting long shadows across the peeling wallpaper. Her hands trembled as she folded laundry, trying to keep her thoughts focused on the mundane task. But Daniel's face lingered in her mind, his expression one of shock and disbelief. She could still feel his gaze, piercing through the years and the distance between them. Her heart ached as she recalled how her children, innocent and oblivious, had asked, "Who was that man, Mama? He knew us." Miley had no answer. What could she say to Diego and Liam that she had kept them from him to protect them from dangers they were too young to understand? The weight of her choices, born of desperation and love, pressed heavily on her chest. Diego, the elder of the twins, shuffled over with his favorite blanket, his sleepy eyes full of concern. "Mama, are you sad?" he asked softly. Miley forced a smile, pulling him close and stroking his hair. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "Mama's just tired." But the truth was, her soul was exhausted from years of carrying secrets and shielding her boys from the harshness of her reality. Seeing Daniel today had reopened wounds she thought had scarred over. It was a cruel twist of fate to cross paths with him now, when she had nothing left to give. That evening, Daniel, back in the solitude of his penthouse, Miley's eyes, shadowed with years of hardship, stared back at him every time he closed his own. The children's laughter, so innocent yet hauntingly familiar, echoed in his ears. Each memory pulled him deeper into an abyss of guilt and unanswered questions. What had happened to Miley after she disappeared? And Why had she run from him today? Daniel, however, was not one to let questions linger unanswered. The next morning he made a call to his trusted private investigator, a man whose discretion and efficiency were unmatched. "I need you to find someone," Daniel said, his tone brisk but resolute. He provided the sparse details he had: her name, her appearance, the fact that she was likely living in dire circumstances. "I don't care what it takes or how long it takes. Just find her." The investigator agreed without hesitation, setting off to comb the city for any trace of Miley and her children. Days turned into a week, the search yielding little more than fragments. A woman fitting her description seen at a shelter, 2 children matching the boy's likeness visiting a park. Daniel's frustration grew, but he refused to give up. On the 7th day, the investigator called with a lead. "We found her," he said simply, providing an address in a run-down neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Daniel didn't wait for a driver. He took the keys to his car and sped through the city streets, his heart pounding in anticipation. As he pulled up outside the dilapidated apartment building, his hands tightened around the steering wheel. This was it. Miley was here, and he was finally going to get the answers he needed. Daniel stood before the crumbling facade of the small house, his heart pounding in a chaotic rhythm. The house seemed to shrink against the vast expanse of the grey sky, its chipped paint and broken shutters. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob, unsure of what awaited him inside. But the memory of Miley's face, tired yet familiar, urged him forward. As the door creaked open, Miley turned, startled. She froze, her hands tightening around a dish towel, her face betraying a mix of fear and disbelief. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the silence thick with emotions too raw to name. "Daniel," she whispered, as though saying his name might shatter the fragile moment. His gaze swept over her, taking in the lines etched around her eyes, the weariness in her stance. It was Miley, but not the Miley he had once known. Before he could speak, 2 small faces peeked out from behind her. Twin boys, with wide, curious eyes, stared at him unabashedly. Daniel felt an almost physical jolt at the sight of them. The boys, with their dark hair and expressions so eerily familiar, seemed to mirror his own childhood photos. "That's him," one of them said, his voice carrying the innocent boldness of youth. Miley stepped forward, her body slightly shielding the boys. "Why don't you 2 go play outside for a while?" she suggested gently. They hesitated, but soon scampered off, their laughter fading as they disappeared down the street. Left alone, Miley turned back to Daniel, her expression guarded. "Why are you here?" she asked, her tone sharp but laced with vulnerability. "I saw you," he replied simply. "And them." His voice softened, breaking under the weight of the emotions coursing through him. "Miley, are they mine?" Her breath hitched. She glanced away, gripping the back of a chair for support. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're yours." The room felt impossibly small, as though her words had sucked all the air out of it. Daniel took a step forward, his mind racing. 6 years. 6 years he had spent grieving her absence, questioning what had gone wrong, and now this revelation. It was too much, too fast. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice cracking with a mixture of anger and hurt. "Why did you leave?" Miley's fingers tightened around the chair, her knuckles white. "You had your whole life ahead of you," she said, her tone defensive yet laced with pain. "Your career, your ambitions. I couldn't be the one to ruin that for you. I couldn't—" She stopped herself, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You think you protected me?" Daniel's voice rose, slightly incredulous. "Miley, you stole 6 years from me, 6 years of their lives." "I did what I thought was right," she snapped, her voice breaking. "I was scared, Daniel, scared of what it would do to you, to us." He fell silent, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, but the pain in her eyes silenced him. She wasn't the same young woman he had once known. Life had clearly been cruel to her, and it tempered his anger with a deep, aching sadness. Before either could say more, Daniel's phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. Judge Murphy. Of course, the man seemed to have a knack for disrupting the most crucial moments of his life. "I have to take this," Daniel muttered, his voice laced with frustration. "But I'll be back tomorrow, Miley. For you and the boys. This isn't over." Miley nodded, her expression unreadable. "We'll see," she said quietly. The following morning, Daniel arrived at the dilapidated house with the expectant heart, hoping to reunite with Miley and the children. However, the house was barren, the quietness oppressive. Daniel knocked several times, each rap on the door echoing his growing despair. A nearby neighbor, an elderly woman sweeping her porch, noticed him and approached. "You're looking for the young woman and her children, aren't you?" she said, her voice carrying a mix of sympathy and concern. Daniel nodded hastily, his heart hammering. "Do you know where they've gone?" The woman hesitated, glancing around as if searching for prying eyes. "They left last night. An older woman came to pick them up." Daniel, startled, asked without thinking, "What did she look like?" She was tall, elegant, with softly curled platinum hair. "I can't imagine why someone so wealthy would come here, but they didn't seem happy to leave." She paused before adding, "She must have been someone important." The description sent a chill down Daniel's spine. He didn't need to ask further. The image of his mother, composed and resolute, formed unbidden in his mind. He clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath his outward calm. Returning home, Daniel stormed into his mother's sitting room. Aleida Christopher, the matriarch of the Christopher family, was seated by the fireplace, her poise unshaken by her son's sudden arrival. She sipped her tea, barely looking up as Daniel entered. "Where are they?" His voice was cold, clipped, and devoid of the warmth she once knew. Aleida placed her cup down with a deliberate calm. "Good morning to you too, Daniel. I see you've been busy." Daniel took a step closer, his expression hard. "Don't play games with me, Mother. You know who I'm talking about. Miley, the children. Where are they?" A faint sigh escaped Aleida's lips as she stood, adjusting her shawl. "You've always had a fiery temperament, Daniel. It's unfortunate that you can't see the bigger picture here. Everything I've done was for you." "For me?" Daniel's voice cracked with disbelief. "You took the woman I love, the mother of my children, and you call it a favor." Aleida's gaze sharpened. "You were too young to understand. Miley would have destroyed your career, your future. She was a distraction. And when she refused to—" She stopped herself, her expression softening for a brief moment before her composure returned. "She chose to leave, Daniel. For your sake." Daniel's heart twisted painfully. "You told her to leave. You threatened her, didn't you? You gave her no choice but to run." Aleida met his gaze, unapologetic. "I did what I had to do. You were on the cusp of greatness, and I couldn't allow a fleeting romance to jeopardize everything. Miley was strong. She made the right decision to protect those children." Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper, laden with years of pain. You robbed me of 6 years, Mother. That years I could have spent knowing my children, loving Miley. Aleda's mask of indifference cracked slightly, but her tone remained firm. It was for the best, Daniel. And now you have the chance to solidify your future with Elizabeth. After your wedding, Miley and the children will be released. They will not interfere again. Daniel recoiled as if struck. Released? The word felt grotesque. You think they're prisoners to be bargained with? They're my family, not pawns in your schemes. Aleda's expression turned icy. You're forgetting who you are, Daniel. The Christopher name demands sacrifices. Elizabeth is the right choice for you. Miley is not. Daniel's chest heaved as he fought to contain his fury. The woman before him, the one who had raised him, now felt like a stranger. If you think I'll go through with this farce of a marriage, you don't know me at all. Aleda's lips tightened, but she remained silent as Daniel turned on his heel and stormed out. Each step he took felt like shedding a piece of his old life. He couldn't allow his mother's manipulations to dictate his future any longer. That night, as he sat alone in his apartment, the weight of his mother's betrayal settled heavily upon him. Yet amidst the turmoil, a single thought burned bright. He would find Miley. He would protect her and the children from the toxic influence of his family, no matter the cost. For the first time in years, Daniel felt clarity. His path was no longer bound by the expectations of the Christopher name, but by his love for Miley and the children he had yet to know. The days following Daniel's confrontation with his mother were steeped in unease. While he continued to trace Miley's whereabouts, he began to unearth unsettling truths buried in the folds of his family's history. It was during a chance review of old documents tucked away in his father's study that the puzzle pieces began to fall into place. The name Murphy surfaced again and again, tied to covert agreements, concealed investments, and silent alliances. The deeper Daniel delved, the clearer it became. His mother and Judge Murphy, Elizabeth's father, had been collaborators in a labyrinth of questionable deals. Together, they wove a web of corruption where political influence and financial power intertwined seamlessly. These arrangements weren't just about wealth, they were about control, the ability to manipulate outcomes and the ruthless safeguarding of their legacies. His engagement to Elizabeth, which he'd long viewed as a calculated arrangement, now appeared even more sinister. It wasn't merely about merging two influential families, it was a business contract designed to entrench their mutual interests. His freedom, his happiness, his love for Miley, all had been deemed expendable in the face of their ambitions. Daniel clenched the papers in his hands, his breath uneven. He felt the weight of his mother's choices and Murphy's manipulation pressing heavily on his shoulders. They had orchestrated everything, from his career's early triumphs to this hollow engagement, all while keeping Miley and the children out of reach. The pre-wedding celebration came far sooner than Daniel had anticipated. It was a grand affair, hosted in the sprawling Christopher estate, filled with laughter and the clink of champagne glasses. Elizabeth was radiant, her every move calculated to exude charm. Judge Murphy stood at her side, exuding an air of superiority that set Daniel's teeth on edge. His mother, ever composed, played the gracious host, seamlessly masking the fractures in their family's foundation. Daniel's heart burned as he entered the room, the murmur of conversations blurring into a hum. He spotted his mother and Murphy in deep conversation, their expressions calm and assured. It took every ounce of his self-control not to march over and shatter the illusion of their perfect alliance. When he finally confronted them, his voice was low but fierce, cutting through the facade. "How long?" he demanded, his gaze shifting between them. How long have you been orchestrating my life behind my back? Murphy smirked, his arrogance grating. Daniel, this is not the place for theatrics. This is a celebration. But Daniel was unmoved. Celebration? His voice tightened. Of what? A farce of a marriage? A partnership built on lies and betrayal? Aleda placed a hand on Murphy's arm, a silent gesture to let her speak. Daniel, she began softly, you must understand every decision we made was for the good of the family. The family. Daniel's voice cracked. You mean for yourselves, for your power, for your deals? His hand trembled as he gestured at Murphy. Did it ever occur to you that I had a choice? That my happiness mattered? Aleda's eyes flickered with something that might have been regret, but it was quickly buried beneath her stoic exterior. You're being dramatic, Daniel. Your marriage to Elizabeth is what secures your future. Our future. Your future, Daniel corrected, his tone icy. Not mine. Never mine. The room buzzed around them, oblivious to the storm brewing in their corner. Daniel's fists clenched, every fibre of his being urging him to expose their schemes, to rip apart the veil of respectability they so carefully maintained. But his throat tightened. The woman before him was still his mother, the person who had raised him, guided him, loved him in her way. No matter her flaws, no matter her betrayals, the bond between them restrained him like a tether. Without another word, Daniel turned and walked out of the hall, his heart heavy. He left behind the chatter, the music, and the suffocating weight of expectation. Returning to his room, he sat in silence, the enormity of his decision settling over him. By morning, he had made his choice. He packed a bag, leaving behind the privileges and wealth that had once defined his identity. He scribbled a brief note to his mother, leaving it on her desk. I can't continue living under the shadow of your choices. I refuse to let you dictate my future. Miley and the children are my priority now. If you care for me, you'll stop standing in my way. Goodbye. With that, Daniel walked away from the Christopher estate, turning his back on the world he once knew. Though his steps were heavy, his resolve was firm. He was no longer a pawn in their game. Now he would carve his path, one step at a time, toward Miley and the family he had vowed to protect. The days were long and fruitless at first. Miley seemed to have vanished without a trace, and every lead brought him only dead ends. Daniel was undeterred. He enlisted the help of Ethan, a childhood friend who had stood by him during the worst of times. Ethan's calm demeanor and resourcefulness provided the anchor Daniel desperately needed. "Give me everything you know," Ethan said one evening, seated across from Daniel in a quiet diner. "She's scared," Daniel replied, his voice low but determined. "She'd want to stay away from anything that feels dangerous or draws attention, but I don't know where she'd go. I don't even know if she has anyone she trusts." Ethan considered this. Sometimes people don't go far. They stay close enough to what's familiar just in case they want to come back. Let me look into the neighborhoods near where you last saw her. True to his word, Ethan worked tirelessly, and within days he returned with a lead. Miley and the children had been spotted in a modest suburb on the city's outskirts. Daniel's heart raced when Ethan showed him the address. The thought of seeing Miley again brought a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Would she forgive him? Could they rebuild what had been broken? When Daniel arrived at the neighborhood, it was a stark contrast to the opulence he'd grown up around. Modest homes with peeling paint and overgrown lawns lined the quiet street. He parked his car a short distance away, unsure of how to approach. As he stepped out, he caught sight of two children playing in a small yard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. His breath caught when he saw them up close. Their resemblance to him was undeniable, each feature a mirror of his own. Before he could gather his thoughts, Miley appeared from the house, her expression weary but tender as she called the children inside. She froze when she saw Daniel. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quickly, taking a cautious step forward. I needed to find you." Miley hesitated, then ushered the children inside before stepping out to meet him. The space between them felt heavy with unspoken words. "I don't know why you came," she said quietly, her eyes avoiding his. "Because I needed to make things right," Daniel said earnestly. "I know what my mother did to you. I know she forced you to leave, and I can't imagine the pain you've gone through. But Miley, I'm here now. I love you. I love our children. Let me prove that to you." Miley's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "It's not that simple, Daniel. You don't know everything." "Then tell me," he urged. "Help me understand." Miley exhaled slowly, as if steeling herself for what she was about to say. "Your mother came to see me that night," she began. "She told me you were getting married, to someone wealthy, someone who could give you the life you deserve. She offered me money, more than I'd ever seen, enough to give Diego and Liam a better life than I could alone." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "And you believed her?" "What choice did I have?" Miley replied, her voice trembling. "You were going to move on, Daniel, and the money. It wasn't for me. It was for them, for their future." Her words stung, but they also revealed the depth of her sacrifice. "Miley," he said softly, stepping closer, "she lied to you. She manipulated you because she thought she knew what was best for me. But she was wrong. You are what's best for me, you and our children." Miley looked at him, her eyes searching his for answers. "I don't know if I can do this, Daniel. I've spent years believing I wasn't enough for you. And then there's her. I promised her I would leave you alone." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She doesn't get to decide what happens between us. Miley, I left my family. The money, the name, the power, it doesn't matter to me anymore. All that matters is you. Please, let me prove it to you." Miley wiped at her tears, the weight of her doubts evident on her face. "I don't know, Daniel," she murmured. "I need time." "You can have all the time you need," Daniel promised. "Just know that I'm not going anywhere, not this time." The tension between them lingered, but for the first time in years, there was also a glimmer of hope. Daniel's decision to move in with Miley and their children marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one where ambition and status were replaced by purpose and belonging. Their new home was modest, a far cry from the grandeur of his past, but it carried a warmth that money could never buy. Daniel embraced this simplicity with open arms, throwing himself into the daily rhythm of family life. Mornings began early, with the laughter of Diego and Liam echoing through the small house. Daniel made it a point to be present, packing their lunches, fixing squeaky toy cars, and listening intently to their tales of playground adventures. At first, the children were hesitant around him, unsure of this man who had suddenly appeared in their lives. But his persistence and quiet affection won them over. Bit by bit, they began to trust him, their eyes lighting up when he entered the room. Miley watched this transformation quietly, her initial skepticism softening. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the boys chase fireflies, she began to speak. Her words came slowly at first, then poured out in a steady stream. She shared the struggles she had endured over the past 6 years, the sleepless nights, the constant fear, and the countless sacrifices she had made to protect their children. "I never stopped thinking about you," she admitted, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "But I couldn't risk coming back. not when they were watching. Daniel listened, the pain of her confession twisting in his chest. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I should have found you sooner," he said, "but I promise you now, I won't let anyone hurt you or the boys again." Miley's walls began to crumble further. She spoke to Daniel about forgiveness, not just for the sake of his family, but for himself. "Carrying anger will only weigh you down," she told him. "You don't have to forget what they did, but letting go might help you move forward." Her words lingered with Daniel, but the path to forgiveness was not so easily walked. The betrayal of his mother was a wound that refused to heal, and though he could not bring himself to expose her crimes, he also knew he couldn't stand by and watch her spiral deeper into her corrupt dealings with Judge Murphy. Daniel began quietly gathering evidence. Business records, coded communications, and questionable transactions. Each piece of paper was another fragment of the truth. He spent late nights combing through the files he had obtained, his resolve hardening with every discovery. When he was ready, he confronted Alida and Murphy in private. "I have everything I need," Daniel said, placing the folder on the table between them. "If you don't end this now, I'll take it to the federal court. I'll make sure there's no way out." Alida's face was pale, her composure faltering for the first time. "You wouldn't," she whispered, but the steely determination in Daniel's eyes silenced her protests. Judge Murphy attempted to reason with him, but Daniel's ultimatum was clear. They were to cease all illicit activities immediately, or face the full force of the law. For the first time in years, Daniel felt like he had taken control of the narrative, rewriting the story that had once been dictated by others. Meanwhile, Miley found her own path to healing. She rediscovered her passion for sewing, starting small by creating dresses for friends and neighbors. The work was modest but fulfilling, and with every stitch she regained a sense of independence and pride. Word of her talent spread, and soon she was taking orders from people across town. The income was modest, but it allowed her to contribute to the family, giving her a renewed sense of purpose. As the weeks turned into months, the little family began to find its rhythm. Diego and Liam thrived under the love and stability of their parents, their laughter filling the home. Daniel made it a priority to be present, whether it was attending their school plays or helping them with homework at the kitchen table. His love for Miley grew deeper each day as he saw her strength and resilience, the way she poured herself into her work and their family. Though the scars of the past remained, they began to fade under the light of a future that now seemed possible. Miley's sewing business flourished, and Daniel found joy in the simple moments, a quiet dinner, a shared smile, or the sound of his children's voices calling him Dad. For the first time in years, Daniel felt like he belonged, not to the name or legacy that once defined him, but to a family built on love, trust, and second chances. Together, they began to rebuild, piece by piece, creating a life where their shared pain became the foundation of something beautiful. The evening was quiet, the soft hum of conversation and the occasional clatter of silverware filling the cozy dining room. Daniel had planned this small gathering with care, inviting only Miley and the children. It wasn't lavish or extravagant, but it carried the warmth and sincerity he hoped would convey everything he felt but hadn't yet put into words. Diego and Damian sat at the table, their laughter infectious as they recounted a small adventure from earlier that day. Miley, seated beside them, wore a gentle smile, her eyes softer than Daniel remembered from the tumultuous weeks before. She looked at him with a quiet gratitude, and he felt the now familiar pang of longing mixed with relief. They were here, together, safe. As the evening drew on, Daniel stood, clearing his throat. The children quieted, their eyes wide with curiosity. Miley looked up, sensing something more significant in his demeanor. "I wanted to take a moment to thank you all," Daniel began, his voice steady but low, "for giving me a chance to be here, to be part of this." He gestured toward the table, then hesitated, his hand resting on the back of his chair. "Miley, you've shown a strength I can hardly put into words. You gave me 2 incredible boys and carried burdens no one should ever have to bear. For that, and so much more, I owe you everything." Miley blinked, caught off guard by the depth of his tone. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but Daniel continued, his gaze unwavering. "I've spent so many years chasing things that didn't matter," he said, glancing briefly at Diego and Damian, who watched him with rapt attention. "It took losing what mattered most to understand what I truly want. And it's this, our family, the chance to build something real with you." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. A collective gasp broke the stillness. Miley's hand flew to her lips as Daniel knelt, his eyes never leaving hers. "Miley, I've made mistakes more than I can count, but if you'll let me, I promise to spend the rest of my life making up for them, being the husband and father you and the boys deserve. Will you marry me?" For a moment, silence enveloped the room, heavy with anticipation. Tears welled in Miley's eyes, spilling over as she nodded, unable to speak. The children burst into cheers, their joy uninhibited and infectious. "Yes," Miley finally managed, her voice trembling but firm. "Yes, Daniel, I will." Relief and happiness washed over Daniel's face as he slid the ring onto her finger. Diego and Damian threw themselves at their parents, their small arms wrapping tightly around them both. It was a moment neither Daniel nor Miley would forget, a new beginning, forged from pain and loss, but brimming with hope. That night, the small family stayed together longer than usual, their laughter and warmth spilling into the quiet corridors of their home. It wasn't just the promise of a wedding or the prospect of a shared future that made the evening significant. It was the unspoken understanding between them that together they could finally lay the ghosts of the past to rest. The morning of the wedding dawned quietly. Daniel adjusted his tie in front of a small mirror, his reflection showing not the stern businessman he had been, but a man stepping into a life built on love, not obligation. The simplicity of the occasion brought him peace. Miley, in another room, smoothed the fabric of her gown, a dress she had sewn herself, every stitch a testament to her resilience and the life she was determined to build. The children, Diego and Liam, played nearby, their laughter filling the room with a warmth that eased her nervous heart. The ceremony was held in a small garden, surrounded by the gentle hum of nature. Only a few people were present, friends who had stood by them through the trials and those who understood the depth of their journey. The officiant began with words that seemed to echo in the quiet space, each phrase heavy with the significance of their union. As Miley walked down the aisle, her steps steady but unhurried, Daniel felt a knot form in his throat. She was radiant, not because of the gown or the setting, but because of the strength and love she carried. Beside her, Diego held one hand and Liam the other, their small faces alight with pride. When Miley reached him, Daniel took her hand, the connection immediate and grounding. The vows they exchanged were simple but sincere, the words not merely promises but reflections of the battles they had fought and the hope they now shared. "I promise to protect you, to cherish you, and to never take for granted the family we've built," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the emotion coursing through him. "And I promise to stand with you, to believe in us, and to build a home where love always has the final word." Miley replied, her eyes glistening but unwavering. The officiant declared them husband and wife, and the kiss they shared was not dramatic, but deeply heartfelt, a quiet seal on their shared commitment. Diego and Liam rushed forward, wrapping their small arms around their parents, the new family united in a way that felt both fragile and unbreakable. The reception that followed was equally understated. Guests mingled under soft string lights, the atmosphere intimate and unpretentious. Friends raised glasses to toast a couple who had endured storms and emerged stronger. Later, Daniel sought out Aleda, his mother, who stood on the edge of the gathering, watching but not approaching. She looked diminished, her once commanding presence softened by guilt and perhaps regret. Daniel approached her, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming," he said simply, his tone devoid of anger, but also of the warmth she had once taken for granted. Aleda's voice trembled as she replied, "I didn't expect to be welcomed. But seeing you happy, it's more than I deserve." Daniel nodded, his gaze steady. "I can't forget, Mother, but I hope one day I can forgive. That will take time. For now, Miley and the children are my priority." Aleda's eyes filled with unshed tears, but she accepted his words with a small, grateful nod. "They're a beautiful family, Daniel. You've made the right choice." As the evening wound down, Daniel and Miley sat together under the stars, the children fast asleep nearby. Miley leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder, her voice soft but resolute. "Do you think the past will ever stop haunting us?" Daniel considered her question before answering. "It might not, but it doesn't have to define us anymore. We've built something stronger than what tried to break us. That's what matters." Miley smiled faintly, her fingers entwined with his. "Then let's keep building." As the night deepened, the small gathering dispersed, leaving behind only the quiet hum of life beginning anew. The garden, now empty of guests, bore witness to a family choosing the hope over fear, love over regret. The story of Daniel and Miley did not end with the wedding, but rather began there. Their bond fortified by trials and a shared determination to create a life untainted by the shadows of the past. Together, they stood as proof that love, true, unwavering love, could endure, heal, and thrive, even in the face of life's harshest challenges. And so, Daniel and Miley's story reminds us that true love, no matter how battered by time or trials, can triumph when built on courage, forgiveness, and hope. Their journey isn't just about healing, it's about rebuilding, brick by brick, a future filled with the light of second chances. If you've ever faced challenges in love or family, let this story inspire you to never give up. Thank you for joining us on this emotional ride. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and stir the soul. Until next time, take care and cherish the ones you love.